She was lying on the floor of her kitchen at midnight, not because she had fallen, not because she was hurt, just because the floor felt like the only honest place left, solid and cold and real when nothing else was. The lights were off. The house was completely silent. And for the first time in 43 years of living, Nora had absolutely no idea how she was going to get up in the morning and keep going. She pressed her cheek against the tile, and then she saw something that changed everything she thought she knew about God, about herself, and about what it means to be found in the dark. Nora had always been the kind of woman who held things together, not because she was fearless, she wasn't, but because she had learned early that things fell apart when she stopped holding them, and she had decided somewhere in her 20s that the cost of stopping was too high, so she kept going, through hard seasons and harder ones, through the things that would have stopped other people. She kept her hands on everything, and she kept moving forward, and she called it faith, when really it was something closer to control. For a long time, the two felt similar enough that she didn't notice the difference. She had built a beautiful life by any measure. A marriage of 18 years to a man named Thomas who loved her steadily and well. 2 sons, Eli, 16, and Noah, 13, who filled the house with noise and sneakers and the particular chaos that only boys of those ages can generate. A small floral business she had started in her garage 10 years earlier that had grown into something real. A church community she had been part of for 15 years, where she led the women's ministry and organized the food pantry, and was the person everyone called when something needed doing. She was indispensable. She had arranged her whole life around being indispensable. And then, in the span of 11 weeks, 3 things happened that her system of holding everything together was not built to survive. First, Thomas lost his job. Not a layoff, not a downsizing. He was let go for reasons that were complicated and painful and that required the kind of private processing that didn't leave room for much else. The financial pressure was immediate and significant. Nora took on more orders, stayed up later, got up earlier, and told herself they would get through it. Then her mother had a stroke. Not fatal, but significant. Nora's mother was 71 and lived 40 minutes away and suddenly needed daily help. Meals, doctor's appointments, the slow, humbling work of assisting a fiercely independent woman through a diminished version of herself. Nora drove the 40 minutes every morning before anyone else in her house was awake. She did not complain. She did not ask for help. That was not how she was built. And then Eli, her older son, her firstborn, the boy who had her eyes and Thomas's stubbornness and a laugh that filled every room he walked into, started disappearing. Not physically. He came home. He ate dinner. He answered direct questions with one-word answers. But the light that had always been so present in him went somewhere, and no matter how carefully Nora tried to reach him, her hands kept closing on air. She would learn later that he was struggling with anxiety and depression that he had been hiding for months. That the pressures of his junior year and the tension in the house and his own private interior storm had become something bigger than he knew how to carry. She would learn all of that later. In those 11 weeks, she just knew her son was slipping away from her and she didn't know how to stop it, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever felt. She kept going. She kept holding. She kept organizing and scheduling and driving and managing and leading the women's ministry on Thursday nights and running the food pantry on Saturdays and answering every text and meeting every need. She had one prayer during those 11 weeks. She said it constantly, in the car, in the grocery store, in the parking lot of her mother's doctor's office. She said it fast and functional, the way you say things when you don't have time to stop and mean them properly. Lord, help me hold it together. And he did, for a while, until the night he decided that holding it together was not what she actually needed. It was a Tuesday. She had driven to her mother's and back, handled a large order that had gone wrong, had a conversation with Eli that ended with him walking silently to his room and closing the door, cooked dinner, cleaned the kitchen, replied to 14 messages about the upcoming women's retreat, and finally sat down at the kitchen table at 11:30. and she could not think of a single reason to get up. Not a dramatic thought. Not a dark thought. Just a profound, bottomless exhaustion that finally outweighed every reason she had been using to keep moving. She sat in the chair, and then slowly she slid down onto the floor. She turned the light off because it was easier than leaving it on. And she lay there on the cold kitchen tile and felt, for the first time, the true weight of everything she had been carrying. Not heroically, not with faith, but alone. Completely, exhaustingly alone. She had been so busy holding everything that she had never once let herself be held. She didn't have words left. That was the thing. After 11 weeks of functional, efficient praying, the kind that was really just a spiritual version of her to-do list, she had nothing. So she didn't pray. Not exactly. She just lay there on the floor and let herself stop. Let herself be empty. Let the silence be what it was, instead of rushing to fill it with the next thing that needed doing. And into that silence she said one sentence. Not with theology. Not with faith, really. Just with the honesty of a woman who had nothing left to perform. I can't do this anymore. I don't know how to do this anymore. She closed her eyes, and then she saw something. She was not asleep. She was not dreaming. She is careful to say this every time she tells the story, because she knows how it sounds, and she would rather be doubted than be dishonest. She saw, in the darkness behind her closed eyes, a figure, warm and luminous and deeply specifically present. Not frightening. Not dramatic. Just there, close in the way that presence is close when someone sits beside you on the floor instead of standing over you. The figure didn't speak, not in words. But what Nora felt, radiating from that presence the way heat radiates from something warm, was so clear it didn't need language. I'm here. I've been here. You don't have to hold any of this alone. She lay there and she wept. Not the controlled private crying she had allowed herself occasionally in the car, the full unguarded kind. The kind that sounds ugly and doesn't apologize for itself, and the presence stayed. Through all of it, warm and close and absolutely unbothered by her falling apart. More than unbothered. It felt somehow like this was exactly what had been waited for. Like the falling apart was not the failure of her faith. Like it was the beginning of something truer. She lay on that kitchen floor for a long time. When she finally sat up, the house was still dark and still quiet. But something had fundamentally shifted. Something that had been clenched in the center of her chest for 11 weeks, longer if she was honest, had loosened. Like a fist, finally, opening. Miracle. The way things changed. The next morning, she called her pastor's wife before she called anyone else. She said, I need help. I've been drowning and I haven't told anyone and I need someone to know. It was the hardest sentence she had said in years. It was also the most important. What followed was not a single miraculous moment, but a constellation of them. The small, specific, grace-filled ways that God moved once Nora finally stopped blocking the door with her own capability. The women in her ministry, the ones she had been serving and organizing and caring for, showed up. Meals appeared. Her mother's afternoon visits were covered by 2 women who lived closer and had quietly been waiting to be asked. A counselor in the congregation reached out and offered to see both Nora and Eli. Eli went. Slowly, with the particular reluctance of a teenage boy who doesn't trust that anyone can handle what's inside him. And then slowly he began to believe that someone could. Thomas found work. Not immediately, not easily, but he found it. And the weeks of financial fear, which had felt like a permanent condition, revealed themselves to be a season. Nora's mother had a recovery that her doctors described as better than expected. She still needed help. She still had hard days. But she was unmistakably coming back to herself. One afternoon, Nora arrived to find her in the kitchen attempting to make biscuits, which she wasn't supposed to be doing. And instead of feeling exhausted, Nora had sat down at the kitchen table and laughed so hard her sides hurt. Her mother laughed too. It was the best afternoon they'd had in months. One Sunday, several weeks after the kitchen floor, Nora sat in church while the worship team played and felt the presence again. The same warmth, the same closeness, the same quality of being fully specifically known. She sat with her eyes closed and her hands open on her knees. Not the organized, capable, hands-on-everything posture she had maintained for years, but open, and she let it fill her. Her pastor preached that morning on Mary and Martha. The familiar story, Martha running and managing and serving, Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. And the thing Jesus says to Martha that Nora had always privately found a little unfair, now landed differently. Martha, Martha, you are.